Greetings everyone. My name is Michael Meredith and I work as a stress management coach and as a shamanic practitioner, and I train holistic healers. Please excuse me for being a little bit nervous this evening. This is my first experience of this type of a broadcast. So yes, thank you for being here. I want to focus on a particular line of the prayer of St. Francis, and it's the line which goes, "Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace." And this line has intrigued me for a long time. And so I would like to share with you this evening some of the experiences that I've had on that journey of exploring, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace, and finding out exactly what the Lord's peace means for me. The prayer of St. Francis wasn't actually written by St. Francis, as you probably know, but it does encapsulate some of his key teachings, so it's always weighed very heavily with me and struck a real chord for me. What St. Francis actually wrote in the Canticle of the Sun was, "Happy those who endure in peace, for by you, Most High, they will be crowned." I want to, I'm just going to give a little overview of the things that I'm going to do. I want to consider the experiences where someone else has been an instrument of peace in my life, and also the experiences where I've been fortunate to be an instrument of peace in someone else's life, and just the general meaning of that, and also some technologies which I have encountered and developed for my own use to help me tune into being an instrument for myself or for other people. So that's an overview of the ground that I have in mind for us to share in this broadcast. And I want to begin by showing you a little video clip in which two people are doing exactly what is spoken of in the prayer of St. Francis, being an instrument of peace for each other. And that clip in just 1 minute really kind of says it all. So I want to ask Brother Sean to play that clip for us. In this clip you'll see two ladies, you'll see a whole group of people being instruments of peace for each other, but two ladies in particular. So that really says it all. That really says it all. And I'm not going to analyse what they do because that would just reduce it. What a beautiful moment was captured there. If you would like to see the whole of that video, we will show some more of it at the end of this broadcast. But if you would like to revisit it in the future, you can find it on my website. I think it's also being placed on being placed on live stream now by Brother Sean. But you can also see it on my website. Maybe I'll hold this up to the camera. Right there, brothermichael.org.uk. And if you go there, you'll see a line about the Doves for Peace broadcast. And if you click on the word resources, then that will lead you to a page where I have already put some links and some videos related to this broadcast, and I'll add any more that seem relevant afterwards, because I'm not sure entirely what will come up. So yeah, a lovely demonstration there of being an instrument of God's peace. One of my most powerful experiences, perhaps the most powerful experience I've ever had, of someone being an instrument of God's peace for me, was with the Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. Some of you are probably familiar with his work, maybe you've even met him. He has a retreat centre in France and occasionally comes to the UK, and I was fortunate to go to some workshops in London led by Thich Nhat Hanh. And in this workshop was held in the main part was held in a large auditorium holding about 200 Buddhists. And Thich Nhat Hanh's energy field filled this entire auditorium with a great sense of peace and absolute stillness that pervaded everyone's heart and soul. And I'd never seen anyone who had such an aura as that before. And it wasn't just a personal experience. Comparing notes with other participants afterwards, we all had this experience of just being infused with this very cool, peaceful, spiritual energy. And in fact, I had that for some days afterwards, and it was only a crisis. Probably it would have lasted even longer, but a friend went into crisis, and my heart took a bit of a pounding, and for a short time it was lost. But it was a very profound experience, that someone can be such an instrument of peace that they can fill a whole auditorium and touch everyone there in such a profound way. So for me, God's peace is not simply about being calm or being still or being happy. It's something very profound, that profound infusion of heart and soul. It's a multi-dimensional experience for me, and I'll say more about that shortly. A couple of other things stood out for me in this experience of Thich Nhat Hanh being an instrument of peace. And it wasn't the things that he said, it was just as soon as he entered the room and there was just some quiet meditation, then this whole experience happened. What also touched me in that event was that he very much came from an interfaith point of view. So he spoke quite a bit about Jesus, which surprised me at a Buddhist event. And he spoke about the kingdom of heaven. And it was really lovely to hear someone speak about another spiritual path in such an embracing way. And what I've learned, and I'm sure that many of you listening now have learned also, is that there is a certain point on one's spiritual path where you connect with other spiritual paths. That place beneath just pure beliefs and rituals and those kind of superficial trappings of religion, what has been called the husk of spirituality. I mean, they're an important interface. I don't intend to minimize them at all, but they are kind of the more superficial levels. And when you get to that deeper level, then you simply meet other people who've maybe traveled a different way. I mean, sometimes we say different paths up the same mountain. So that was one thing that struck me about Thich Nhat Hanh as well, that he was beyond Buddhism. And at one particular point, he completely shocked his audience because he was talking about non-attachment being a key Buddhist theme, of course. And he said, yes, non-attachment is important. Don't attach to things, not even Buddhism. Don't even attach to Buddhism. And I just felt this gasp go throughout the auditorium, all these people who had been working away at Buddhism. And Thich Nhat Hanh, being such a great spiritual being, don't even attach to Buddhism. And the way he could speak freely about the kingdom of heaven as an allied experience to the experience of enlightenment in the Buddhist tradition, that touched me also. However, there was a point at which I did go a separate path from Thich Nhat Hanh, and this was really about connection to everyday life, and this is just a personal thing for me. Thich Nhat Hanh has very low energy, and he speaks very softly, even with a microphone. People couldn't hear, and throughout his sessions, people were putting their hand up and saying, could you speak a little bit louder, say? And in fact, he couldn't, and his monks had warned us before the workshop that he would speak very quietly, and we'd have to be extremely quiet and listen very intently. And I realised that this is a feature of going a very long distance in spiritual connection, to the point where you are travelling this path of non-attachment. And for me, I don't particularly like the word non-attachment. I prefer the word over-attachment as something that I want to avoid, something that interferes with the flow of life, the flow of life's journey for myself and for the people around me. And so I realised that there's a point in what psychologists would call dissociation, or splitting off from the material everyday world. There's a point at which energy is lost, and I've noticed this in a number of people who have gone a long way down this path of transcendence. And I'm not diminishing that journey. It's wonderful to be in the presence of people who have done that. But for me, I still want to have a good foot in the everyday world. I still enjoy being a human being, and I want to merge those two experiences of being a spiritual being and a human being, and not leave one of them behind. And in that everyday experience, what I find is there's a lot of energy in that, in the dramas and the stress and of everyday living and relationships. There's an energy in that. Stress is simply energy. And so my personal choice is to embrace a certain amount of stress, put myself, as in fact this evening, speaking to your good self, stepping out of my comfort zone. And it's very energizing, that anxiety beforehand. As any stage performer knows, professional stage performers worry if they don't feel anxious before stepping out before an audience, before connecting on a big scale, because they know they need that energy, that energy of anxiety, because they're placing themselves in an area where they're not fully in control. So that's something that I learned about the experience of the workshops with Thich Nhat Hanh. I found that for myself I wanted an intermediate place. Maybe at a later stage in my life I will want to go much more into the realm of transcendence and be less attached to everyday life. But for now, my choice is to connect with everyday life, and because I love richness, I love diversity, and I love nature. And the shamanic path, which I mainly follow at the present time, although rather interfaith really, but the interfaith path that I mainly follow, the shamanic path that is of particular interest to me, is very big on connecting nature and spirit and kind of going in both directions, interacting with the earth and interacting with the world of spirit. And that for me is a very rich realm of experience. At this point, I'm very aware of the dangers of speaking to a virtual audience, that I can't see the cues which say that I'm rambling, or I'm not clear, or I'm boring. And I hope that you will use the chat room. I'll take a look in there occasionally, and tell me if anything's, if you have any questions or comments. But I also want to include some little moments where we can all just pause and breathe and reflect for a moment, and that gives me a chance to get back on track with where I want to go. So I'll just signal that little moment of reflection with these hand symbols. Thank you. Yes, I've spoken about my profound experience that I had with Thich Nhat Hanh, and I had a similar experience with another Buddhist Lama, actually. And it was, for me, another lovely interfaith experience, in that this Lama was invited to speak in a Christian church in the city of Cambridge, near where I live. And again, he spoke of non-attachment, but he also spoke of our emotional attachments, and he spoke of, for example, the importance of cultivating compassion without sympathy, without becoming too cloying to the object of our compassion, without entangling. And he also spoke about, in the same kind of vein, which reminds me a little bit of the Beatitudes, actually, in that he also said, cultivate joy without mania, joy without mania. And I was familiar with this expression, well, this concept of cultivating compassion without feeling other people's feelings for them in the act of sympathy, getting entangled in their things, which makes it more difficult for them to sort out their own emotions if we're in there wading around. So he used this expression, joy without mania, and this puzzled me. So at the end of this session in this Christian church, I went up to ask him a question. And as I approached him, I became aware of of his aura, just like in the case of Thich Nhat Hanh, this whole aura around him of stillness and a sense of kind of a barrier that I shouldn't just plunge into walking right up to him. And I just found there was some kind of natural energetic barrier, and I paused at that barrier. And someone else stepped into the space and spoke to him for a moment, and then that person fell back, and it just felt that it was my moment to step forwards. And so I put my question to him. You spoke of joy without mania. I don't quite understand that. Can you explain that for me? And he looked at me, and he didn't answer. He just simply looked at me with a look which said, you know the answer. You know the answer. Tell me. It was a very extraordinary experience. I asked him to tell me the answer, and he gave me a look which says, you tell me. And in that moment, the answer came to me. And I said, yes, when we attach to joy, when we over-attach to joy, that's when we stray into this territory of mania. And the only place from mania is a kind of crashing down into depression if you spend any time in mania, because it's unbalanced, it's ungrounded. So that was another magical experience of peace, where my mind, my ego is struggling for some secure information, and instead I'm given peace. I'm given peace. And in that peace, I find my own answer. And what a beautiful thing that is. And I'm sure that everyone here listening knows this experience, has brought that experience to other people, and has had that experience brought to them. And I just acknowledge you for that, and it's such a wonderful thing to do. So I want to share another moment where I was on the receiving end of an instrument of peace, or at least that's not quite true. I saw someone be an instrument of peace in a very dramatic way for someone else. And this was a spiritual meeting that I went to, which was addressed by a monk from a Christian tradition. A Christian tradition with a fairly New Age flavour, in that he was a married monk. And he spoke very well for a period of time. And at the end of his presentation, he said, right, let's have some discussion and some questions. And on the front row was a man, put his hand up, and he said, well, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. You speak about God. It means absolutely nothing to me. I have no understanding of that experience. And the monk said, well, would you like that experience? Would you like to have an experience now of God? And the man was a bit taken aback by this response, but he quickly recovered and said, well, yes, I'd love to. Give me this experience of God. Now, I should explain that this meeting took place in a Society of Friends meeting house. And as I'm sure you know, the Society of Friends are often known by the name of Quakers, because early in their history there was a lot of passionate sermons and a lot of transcendent connection, and people would literally shake as they became aware of the reality of God. So for me, this was a particularly amazing moment, that I was in a Quaker house and I'd never seen this experience, never seen someone quake in front of God. And so the monk just simply said to the man on the front row, all you have to do is look into my eyes. And of course I was looking into the monk's eyes as well, and at that time it was a fairly new experience to me, but now I know this experience very well. What the monk did was to efface his ego. He just went into his personal void, you could say, this personal space within him, which is the space that connects us to the divine, to the experience of God or Great Spirit, whatever concept or label you want to use. And so I know now what he did. He simply effaced his ego and he became a channel to the divine. And it was very quick. The man started to twitch a little bit, and then he started to shake and shake till he was really in quite a kind of convulsive state, you could say. And he had the experience of God. He experienced the Lord's peace, the peace of God, the kingdom of heaven. He experienced it in that moment, and it was a devastating experience, as it is. Profound, beautiful, but quite devastating when it's new to us. And that experience leads into a lot of practices which we're seeing now in spirituality at the present time. A lot of experiences of channeling, and of channeled healing, and of channeled enlightenment. So, for example, Reiki has become very popular now as a channeling in which the practitioner connects someone to a divine energy which has a profound experience of peace for them. And in my courses we use as a training aid, we use a rather similar practice which comes from the Middle East, which is called Ilai Nur, which means divine light. And it's done in a slightly different way, but again it's a channeling, a transmission of divine light, not specifically a healing. It can be just a an insight can come to the person who's on the receiving end. And there are many of these practices. I'm sure that many of you will be familiar with them. One that I spent some time with was a Hindu derived channeling practice called Diksha. And what I've found in a wide range of these, and also I should say just in simple spiritual healing practices, which go back, of course, thousands of years, which go back to Jesus and beforehand, of course. And it's lovely to think, I remember when I was a child and you hear the Bible stories and these amazing healings of Jesus and the magical touch that he had. For me, the journey that I've travelled in recent years, finding that this isn't something that happened long ago, but it's something which is happening now in our world, and it's something which is accessible to all of us. It's accessible to us in the form of finding instruments of peace in our life, but it's also accessible to us in that we can become instruments of peace. Before moving on, to invite you to join me in one of the technologies that I have found useful and that I've worked with for a long time in terms of accessing peace, because of course in the everyday world we get very separated from the kingdom of heaven or God's peace. And so it's very useful to have a little armoury of tools that we can use to reconnect ourselves. I certainly find that very, very useful. But before I speak about tools, I think I should also say that, as we saw in the video, you don't always need tools really. And the greatest tool is simply being ourselves, in my experience. Just being true to ourselves. I would say taking our place in the web of life, finding that our humble place, but our important place in the web of life as a unique cog in the great machinery of life. I think that in itself makes us an instrument of peace, just to find our place, take our place, and to allow the space for those around us to take their place and to make their contribution. In this respect, speaking about the kingdom of heaven as actually a very simple, ordinary experience, not just something you can access through sophisticated spiritual technologies, but also just through the very simple things. And one of my experiences of being on the receiving end of instruments of peace, and Brother Sean will be able to relate to this as well, because I know that, like myself, he is a fan of the chickens, the chicken world, the chicken fraternity. And in fact, I don't know if you can see behind me. I've actually brought along a little chicken, and I want to make the point that no chickens are going to be harmed in the course of this broadcast. So this is a non-harmable chicken. And some of my most profound moments of the kingdom of heaven, of God's peace, have been spent in the company of these creatures, not just chickens, but of course many. And yeah, I see that Paul loves hens. Brilliant. And for me, I don't know what it is for Paul, but for me it's the fact that they are simple, instinctual creatures. They're never trying to be anything else. A chicken is always 100% a chicken. And they're an amazing, complex and magical piece of creation, and every chicken is an individual. As those of us who are chicken fans and chicken keepers will know. And for those of you who don't particularly relate to chickens, I'm sure that many of you will relate to animals and birds of one form or another. So at the moment, meerkats have really caught the spiritual imagination and the spiritual experience of many people, of course. So the world of nature then is a great place for connecting to the kingdom of heaven, I believe. We don't always need fancy spiritual technologies, and as we all know, a beautiful sunset, an amazing waterfall. For me, just simply sitting by a gurgling stream has given me a profound sense of peace which perfuses my heart and soul. And for me, this sense of peace also has a kind of a grounding aspect to it. And in this connection, I want to remind you about a drawing of Leonardo da Vinci. It's a drawing he draws on a Roman architect who went before him, and it's the theme of his drawing was really the sacred geometry of the human form, the sacred geometry of the human form. So here's his drawing. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with that, and it's always been quite meaningful for me. For one thing, it's like a mandala, actually. The human body is a mandala, the circle and the square that he placed around the body. But also, his drawing has been used to illustrate the theme of connecting heaven and earth. And for me, the experience of the kingdom of heaven, or God's peace, always involves connecting heaven and earth, not purely connecting to heaven. Because, of course, the earth, we can say, is the place of manifestation of spirit. It's the place of God's creativity. And so, for me, the spirit world and the everyday world are in no way separate. The everyday world is perfused with spirit, as I'm sure we're all aware. I think the idea that the spirit world is perfused with human nature is more challenging. It's more challenging. But I will just throw this out as a little challenge, because of course it says in Genesis that God made man in his own image. But what I have found in my journey through spending time with people on many different spiritual paths and religions, what I found is that man makes God in his own image to some extent, and that we configure God to kind of suit ourselves in various ways. And if this isn't too mundane a remark to make, you could say that it's about diversity in the marketplace, giving us all lots of different choices, because creation is about the most phenomenal creativity, just the most amazing, phenomenal diversity that we see in creativity. So I understand that this will be a challenging idea perhaps for some people, but for me, I feel that there's a bit of us in God, and of course, in my understanding, we are also rays of the divine. And so it says in Genesis that God breathed life into Adam. And when we look at a lot of ancient languages, the word for spirit and for breath is very similar. So in Latin, for example, the word spiritus means both spirit and breath. And from spiritus we get a lot of our modern words. So we talk about spirits, but we also talk about respiration and inspiration, which all come from this Latin root spiritus, which actually means breath as well, which is kind of the nature connection. So there's like the human aspect of the breath, the divine aspect of spirit, and then there's the wind of life, the movements of energy which create this universe and this amazing experience of human life. And so in Greek, there's the word pneuma, a similar range of meaning, and in Old English, the word geist, as in poltergeist, geist meaning spirit, but also meaning breath. And I could mention also that in Sanskrit, another of the oldest languages of the earth, the word prana means both spirit and breath, and wind as well, this same trifold meaning, which is quite fascinating. And it just shows that there is no new information or no new understanding. The ancients knew a great deal of what we are constantly rediscovering and re-exploring. So this leads into a particular practice that I want to invite you to join me in. It's a practice that I've developed over many years, and I call it four-phase breath mindfulness. There's quite a lot to it, and I'm just going to give a little snippet of it now. But there is a link on the web page, and I see Brother Sean has posted that up for you. Maybe I can display it again. So if you go there and you follow the link to the resources for this broadcast, you will find a link to a page about four-phase breath mindfulness. What I want to invite you is just a simple version of it now, and it will not be entirely unfamiliar to you, I'm sure, because so many of us have found breath work an important tool on our spiritual path. So it begins by simply observing our simply observing our breath, or you could say observing the path of our breath. So, of course, we know that we breathe in and we breathe out. And if that's all we do, if we breathe in and then immediately breathe out, we call that a bellows breath. Yes, the link is in the chat room, thank you. So we call that a bellows breath, where we just breathe in and out. But sometimes there's a pause. For some people there will be a pause at the end of the in-breath. For some people there will be a pause at the end of the out-breath. And in my researches over the years, I found that these pauses are extremely significant, and their presence, their absence, their duration, whether they're smooth or jerky, can give us a lot of experience, a lot of feedback about our lifestyle, because I believe that the way we breathe is a mirror of the way we are living. And so by looking into this mirror, by simply closing our eyes, observing our breath without controlling it or changing it, simply observing the breath, we are looking into this mirror of how we are living in this moment. So I'm going to give you a moment to do that, to just close your eyes, watch the pattern of your breath, notice how your mind wants to come in and make it correct or fix it, make it a certain way. Please resist that movement of the mind, because, and also as you watch the pattern of your breath, you might find that it changes spontaneously, because of course attention is energy. When we give attention to the breath, we're giving it energy with which it can move to a more natural and healthy, holistic pattern. So, I wonder what you found. For myself, what I found was that at the end of the in-breath there was a pause, and because I've worked a lot with that pause at the end of the in-breath, which is a very healthy pause, it's a kind of a self-discipline pause, a moment for taking control and for making a voluntary decision about when to breathe out. And for me, interestingly there, I found that I lingered a long time in that phase, that pause at the end of the in-breath. I just relaxed there, and the impulse to breathe out took a long time to come. And what I learned from that was that I just needed that pause to take more control. I was actually beginning to lose way a little bit. You know, my mind wanders to the people out there, and I'm kind of wondering how this is all going with you. And that's very difficult with a virtual audience. So there was that moment of control, meaning that I've just got to slow down a little bit, because these pauses are part of what slows down our breath cycle, of course. What's most important in the breath cycle as far as spiritual connection is concerned, according to my researches, is the pause at the end of the out-breath. One of the things that I teach people in the course of my work, I train shamanic practitioners, and we teach them, with the help of my colleagues, we teach them the art of shamanic journeying. For those of you familiar with Jungian psychology, there's an aspect of shamanic journeying which is about engaging with archetypal forms, really. I won't go into that at the moment because it's quite deep waters, but it's also very similar to prayer in that it's also a way to connect with what we'd call in shamanism upper world beings, so angels, archangels, ascended masters, wise beings, and even with the Great Spirit. So in this experience of shamanic journeying, training people to open their spiritual connection who have never done that before, then surrender is very important. And so at the end of the out-breath is an absolutely golden moment for practicing the art of surrender, because we've just given out our energy. We're not doing anything, we're not actively breathing in again. So it's a moment where we are physically collapsed, energetically collapsed. For many people, it's very difficult to hold that pause at the end of the out-breath, because there can be anxiety there can be a fear of death, a fear of the void. But of course, in our spiritual journey, we have to make that journey into the void. To just draw on the wisdom of Taoism for a moment, in Taoism they say this void where nothing is happening. It's the place of pure beingness, not going anywhere, not doing anything, not thinking about anything. And for those of us who are very entangled in the hurly-burly of life, it's quite an alarming place, quite a frightening place. And in our overstimulated culture, where there is so much mass communication and so much overcrowding of populations, those moments of stillness can be rare for many people. And I'm sure that many of you know that stillness is a golden gateway to the spiritual life, to spiritual connection, that inner gateway, as opposed to our outer gateways through ritual and prayer. So the pause at the end of the out-breath is our opportunity to enter this void, this place of pure beingness. And as Taoism teaches us, it's the place of no thing, hence the void, nothing, but it's also the place of everything. So it's like all potential creations are there, but in a yin and yang way, there's also nothing, because the creations have not yet been created. So there's kind of nothing. But it's an area of vast potential, and that vast potential, of course, is the spirit. The spirit is that potential that flows through us and manifests through us and creates through us. So at the end of every cycle of the breath, we have the opportunity to make that spiritual connection. And so in this breath mindfulness, once we've seen what our breath pattern is like, we find that we have no pause at the end of the out breath, or very limited pause. We can encourage ourselves to just stay there a little bit longer, not with any forcing, of course, because this is a meditative practice, so any sense of forcing would be quite counterproductive. But we can encourage ourselves just to be brave. So it's a place of courage and faith. And as we know, courage and faith are essential ingredients to our spiritual development. So there's a little test of faith for us at the end of the out breath. Can we just sit there and wait? And when we can sit and wait at that pause at the end of the in breath, then something magical happens. Then what happens is that the next in breath happens spontaneously. So we say the breath breathes us. Instead of us actively creating an in breath, the in breath moves us, it creates us, just like going back to Genesis, God breathed life into Adam. So this is a place where we connect with the life force which is a spiritual force. Just by simply sitting in a pause at the end of the out breath. For some people this can be an anxious place. It's a place where we can access things which need from the past, which need to be processed, resolved, cleared, before we can sit comfortably in that place of stillness. Eckhart Tolle has been very eloquent on this subject of stillness, and I know that some of you are familiar with Eckhart Tolle's work, and on my website, if you just put in his name, you will find links to his work, and you can find them on YouTube as well. And he's very good at this going into stillness, and it's a very profound place where actually a lot happens. Manifestation is in progress, and it's a very wonderful feeling in terms of building up faith. It's something that I learned in the years when I was studying Buddhism, something I learned from those guys. I should say that I've studied and practiced, I've been fortunate to study and practice with a range of religions and spiritual paths, and I found wisdom and useful technologies in all of them. And yes, I've completely lost my thread now. Time for a moment with the tincture while I just sort myself out. Yes, time to reconnect with myself. Working with the head and the voice, I just got disconnected from the heart and soul for a moment then, and so the signal came through to reconnect. And of course, this is exactly what we're talking about, this moment at the end of the breath. It's that reconnective place, that place of stillness. And if we can surrender in that place, it requires this act of surrender. And what I learned in Buddhism was that faith, this is how it was put to me, faith is like a shoot, like a plant, and it will grow for a while. We'll have experiences which cultivate our spiritual faith, but then things will happen which crush that plant. But actually the things which crush our faith, they are actually the energies which that plant will then feed on, and the next time it will grow taller. And it will carry on growing taller and taller, and after a while it will flower and it will produce seeds and all these kind of things. It may even become a great oak tree. So the thing about faith is it needs to be challenged. and we just do what we can in the way of courage and faith, and then we abandon ourselves to stress and drivenness and ego and so on for a while. But that plant will come back to us again. The signals will be there, as they were for me just a few moments ago. We're brought back onto our course in due course, and faith can grow. And this experience of pausing in the in-breath and savouring that, and then feeling the breath breathing you, it's a real experience of our life force, and it always reminds me that I don't have to work too hard on life, and I am someone who historically has worked too hard at the business of living, and has to tread, and is still treading a long path of just going at it a little bit more, with a little bit less effort. In Buddhism they would say balanced effort. If you don't try, then you don't make any progress, but if you try too hard, you kind of get a kickback effect. And I'm sure we're all familiar with that, trying too hard at things. So it's a lovely feeling when you realise that there is this life force, and we know about it theoretically, that our breath will keep going, that you can't kill yourself by stopping breathing. But we kind of need that reminder that actually we are spiritually supported, we are life force supported. We don't need to do all the work of living. There are things beyond our everyday experience which support us, and of course that's the heart of the spiritual life, the spiritual journey. Oh, I realise that time is getting on now. So I think that it's probably time for me to bring things to a conclusion, draw together some threads of my experience. I have a little crib sheet here so that I can rattle through these fairly quickly and not get too lost. So the first conclusion that I've drawn from my journey is that divine peace, God's peace, the kingdom of heaven, it's a multi-dimensional thing. It's not simply being calm, it's not simply being happy, it's not simply being still. Many of these things can be gateways to the kingdom of heaven, the Lord's peace. But it's a multi-dimensional thing. It's something that involves heart and soul. It's something which involves being in the right place at the right time, knowing our place in the great scheme of things, and taking that place. I use the expression being in the right place at the right time, doing the right things with the right people. That absolutely for me is the kingdom of heaven when I have that experience. And some time ago, about 12, 13 years ago, I went through a period of enormous financial crisis where every day I lived in fear of losing my home, my place of employment. I was self-employed, and I was unable to draw on social security benefits because I didn't have my accounts up to date, and I just lived on a knife edge. I ate all the food in my house. I had no food in my house. I had no money in the bank. I had lots of demands for money for my mortgage and living expenses. Had to walk everywhere, or kind friends gave me lifts. I couldn't, no money to buy petrol. And this carried on for some time, and it kind of got worse and worse and worse. There was a time when I realised I had no paper money in my wallet, and I thought, well, that's pretty terrible. And then there came a point where I had no coins, actually. And financial hardship for me, if people say, well, what is financial hardship? Financial hardship is going through all your clothes for the third time, hoping there might be a few coins that you missed the previous two times. That for me is financial hardship in a nutshell. But what carried me through that experience, and I learned so much in that experience, although it was terrible. But what carried me through was that because I had no security, absolutely no security. And I couldn't afford phone calls. I couldn't connect to lots of people who would be my relationship sense of community. I lived in a remote area. You know, all the normal things that give us security, they were either not available or they were about to disappear at any moment. When the bailiffs came to possess my TV and my hi-fi. And what kept me going was those moments when I felt I was in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing with the right people. And there was a succession of those moments. And I really learned to savour and to value those moments. And without all that, all my security being taken away so profoundly, I would never have really savoured and really internalised the importance of having that sense of being in our place in the great web of life. And I want to thank you today for being with me in my place in the web of life, for sharing this space together. And if you would like to contact me to continue any points that have been raised in our time together, you can contact me via that web address. And I hope there will be an opportunity to speak with you again in the future. And I'm incredibly grateful to Brother Sean for having given me this opportunity to be with you this evening. I would like to close with a little prayer. O great Spirit God, who is the perfection of love, harmony and beauty, the glue which binds heaven and earth, open our hearts so that when we may hear your voice within us, disclose to us your divine light, which is hidden in our souls, that we may know and understand life better. Merciful and compassionate force in the universe, thank you for your great generosity to us this evening. Teach us your loving power of forgiveness. Raise us above the distinctions and differences which divide us. Send us the peace of divine spirit and unite us all in your perfect oneness. And I would like to ask Brother Sean if he would show the rest of the video, please.